Good morning. Are you as excited as I am? Woo! We are so excited that you are here. We are excited that Joel Salatin is here, and we are excited that Michael Pollan is here. This has been a moment that's been in the works for 10 years or so. These guys haven't been together, I think, for 10 years. And I remember when I first watched Food Inc., and it really changed not only my perspective, but it changed my life for the better. And I know it changed Joel's life, and a lot of you guys have been impacted by that, by also Omnivore's Dilemma and many, many other things. I'm going to take a moment, and I'm just going to introduce Joel, and I'll let Joel take it from here. Please welcome Joel Salatin to the stage.
Thank you, Rory. Well, it's just a real delight to have such a good turnout for what I hope will be a very fascinating conversation. And thank you all for coming and for investing your day here. Rory can attest to this, I'm sure, that people don't look at writers and authors. They look at their works. So we all know about Some Beach. Rory wrote it, okay? So many people, most people know about Omnivore's Dilemma, New York Times bestseller, sold over 1 million copies, right, Michael? I mean, true, you don't have to sell 1 million copies of a book to be a New York Times bestseller. What do you have to sell normally? Something, 100,000. If you sell 10 or 20,000 books, to be a New York Times, a lot of it is orchestrated by whatever the thing. So to have a book that actually sold over 1 million copies is truly remarkable. So that wasn't his first book, but that truly launched a lot of things. So his first book was Second Nature, A Gardener's Education. I'm just giving you the history. 1991, that one came out. So you were writing for the New York Times at the time. He was a New York Times writer. And then A Place of My Own, about his little writing studio, came out in 1997. Botany of Desire in 2001. And by this time, he's really heading into the food space. And then 2006, is that still the blockbuster, Omnivore's Dilemma? Yeah. I remember one time asking Michael after Omnivore's Dilemma came out, well, how'd it do? He says, well, let's just put it this way. I don't have to work another day of my life. And that's pretty cool when I think any artist that actually makes a living at their art, whether it's writing, sculpting, singing, whatever, is a tremendous success. 2006, Omnivore's Dilemma. And then shortly after that came out the blockbuster documentary Food Inc., which Michael, Eric Schlosser, Fast Food Nation group put together, and that truly inspired our food culture. Then in 2008 came In Defense of Food. 2013, Cooked, A Natural History of Transformation. 2018, How to Change Your Mind, a lot about psychedelics and different things, and now he's working on consciousness. But Michael is known for being able to condense difficult thoughts into very poignant statements like, eat food, mostly plants, not too much. I mean, isn't that great? I mean, that is truly an essence. Another one is pay more, eat less. These are powerful concepts going on. So, right now, he's teaching at Harvard, 2 writing classes, one about science writing and one about first-person writing. And so I think we're all just delighted and honored to have such an icon of who has challenged the food industry in the U.S. over a lifetime that many of us are either benefiting from or directly had our lives and friends influenced by the writing of this wonderful man, Michael Pollan.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
I think you came unhooked. Michael, let me see if I can fix you.
Sorry, I lost my...
Well, it's better to be unhooked than unhinged.
Hello? Can you hear me now? Excellent.
There you
Excellent.
go.
Well, Joel, I want to thank you for that warm introduction, and Rory for inviting me to come to the Homestead Festival. Joel and I go way back. I count myself as having two really important teachers when it comes to food and agriculture and the land and how to live. And Joel is one of them. Wendell Berry is the other. Both heroes, both writers and farmers. I'm not a farmer, but what I know about farming, a lot of what I know about farming came from time I spent on Joel's farm. So the opportunity to be here today speaking with him was something I just couldn't pass up. So
That's great. Well, it's great to have you, and I think it would be interesting for these folks just to kind of get our context a little bit of how. And you correct me if I'm wrong, but if I remember correctly, you had written, you were getting ready to write Power Steer.
yeah, that's right.
Okay, so this was a New York Times Sunday edition article.
2002.
2002, okay, I couldn't remember the year, but you were doing research on it, and at that time, you had gotten interested in grass-finished beef, the whole idea of non-grain finished beef, grass-finished beef. And at that time, Alan Nation, founder and editor of Stockman Grass Farmer. I was writing a column in Stockman Grass Farmer, and if you did a search for grass-finished beef in the U.S., our farm, Polyface Farm, was one of the few.
There wasn't a lot then. Yeah. It's true.
And so Michael, in doing research, what you'll learn about him very, very quickly is he really embeds himself in the story. That's how you get the story. I mean, if you want to write an article about corn farmers, you write on a combine with a guy that's harvesting corn, and so
or buy a steer, as I did for that article.
Buy a steer. Well, he calls me and asks me to ship him
chicken or grass-fed beef.
I think it was a steak. You wanted a steak, and I'll let you tell the story from there.
And he said, "Sorry, but I don't do that." And it's like, if you want to taste my chicken, you're going to have to come down to Swope, and which I ultimately did. Yeah. So that was a turning point for me. That article, actually, which became a chapter in Omnivore's Dilemma. I wanted to understand where the beef I was eating came from. Little did I know that to find out where your food comes from in America, you now need an investigative journalist. 75 years ago, everybody knew where their food came from. But it's hidden now, and behind this long, opaque food chain. And this was an article not primarily about grass-fed beef and alternatives. It was an article about the industrial system and how screwed up it is, and that we were feeding corn to animals that evolved to eat grass, and that necessitated all these pharmaceuticals that we were giving them so they could not get sick on their corn diet. And it was a pretty dark piece, and I bought a steer in South Dakota. I followed it through the whole process from insemination to slaughter and wrote this account of it. And it was, I didn't want to leave people feeling despair at the end of this article. So even though it was a long piece, it was like 8,000 words, I wrote a section at the end. There is an alternative. There's a handful of people, and they're finishing cattle on grass, and it might be a little more expensive, it might be a little chewier, but, compare these two food systems. You have one, which is an oil-based food system, using fossil fuel to create the nitrogen fertilizer, to create the corn, to feed the animals. You're eating oil, essentially, when you eat that kind of meat. Or imagine another food chain where the sun feeds the grass and the grass feeds the animals. And of course, that other food chain is the one I learned about from Joel. And I included, and I had to fight my editors because the article was already long enough. But I said, no,
This was for the Sunday edition,
Yeah,
so
this
it
is
wasn't the regular weekly paper. It was the
No, it was a long
special-
piece. It's a
special
long
Sunday
piece.
edition.
And you can find it on the Times website. It's called Power Steer, or on my website, michaelpollan.com. All my articles are there for free. But I wanted to say there isn't, it's not a question of vegetarianism or eating, industrial meat. There is this other way to go. And I fought to hold on to those 4 or 5 paragraphs. And I was so glad I did, because it started something. And I knew it had. I was living in Berkeley at the time, and where I was teaching. And I went into a butcher shop in Oakland a couple days after the article came out. And I said, do you sell any grass-fed beef? And the butcher, this old guy with the blood-stained smock on, looks at me and goes, what's going on? You're the 5th person this week. He'd never been asked for grass-fed meat. It's like, now to me, all right, that's great news, building a market for grass-fed meat. But my writer's vanity said, they got to the end of this long article. And that really meant a lot to me.
They turned the Seymour on page 5.
Exactly. They had to go to the jump.
That's like the ultimate. That's like a writer's nirvana, when you do it's called the jump. The jump in newspaper speak.
So Joel, I don't know if you know, was a journalist before he was a farmer. So we share that.
Yeah. So when Michael asked us to ship him a steak, I was at that time. I was a local food cultist. I mean, I would.
Yeah.
Okay, I was a local food cultist, and I wouldn't ship him, and so he came down. It was a spring, and you might tell the story better than I, but at that time that time of year we were pigerating. We had the pigs in the barn, and the concept of omnivore's dilemma was already formulating in your mind.
Oh yeah.
And so he came in. We had these pigs on the deep bedding, and the pigs were, and we sat on 5-gallon buckets and just talked as the pigs.
And you told me about how the corn was at the bottom of this layer cake.
Yeah, and it awakened a not organic, not industrial, but it was another pathway.
Yeah.
And he said, I want to come down for a week and stay with you, and I'm working on this book. Put you in the book. Okay, we'd been in a few books. You get a graph or two, just enough to make it into the index. And then so he came down. It's been a week with us.
Remember, I was sleeping in the shortest bed I'd ever been on.
Yeah,
in your mom's
he
trailer.
stayed in mom's house.
It's a 5-foot bed, and I'm 6'1". And
yeah.
Anyway, it was challenging. And you got up early too.
Got up early.
I didn't get that.
But he was a game player. We were in hay, I think. We were making hay. It was hot. And
we worked hard.
Yeah, we did, and had a wonderful week. And people ask me, what's this guy like? I said he's like an 8-year-old that just follows you around asking questions all the time.
That's the job.
But that's how you get the story.
Yeah.
No question is off limits, and no question is too silly.
Yeah.
And so then, of course, when the book came out, and then we realized we were like, a third of the book. It was quite and for us, for sure, it was a life jump and a real treat for that. So, is there anything else about that?
No,
story
it was a transformative experience. I mean, if you've been to Joel's farm, you know what I'm talking about. But it was so interesting to see how this orchestration of species moving through the land. And, people have this image of organic or sustainable farmers as that's the way my grandfather farmed. And, it's so not true. There's so much innovation. Most farmers' grandfathers would think you were crazy. And so for me, that was exciting. It was exciting about learning about new technologies. I mean, this was a new technology, all based on the sun and grass. And the first thing you did when we got there, I wanted to go see the animals. I really like animals. I used to have a pet pig named Kosher. My father named it. I didn't name it. It met with a really unfortunate ending, but I can tell you that later. But
I'm sure it was a kosher ending.
yeah. But before we could go see the animals, he said, no, I got to show you something else first. And he walked me out into a pasture, and we got down on our stomachs, basically, and he pulls out a grass plant and starts telling me about this relationship of cattle and grass and how the rotational grazing leads to the sequestration of carbon. And he showed me all the soil he'd built over the time he's been on the farm. And that was really inspiring. That was one of the most inspiring moments I've had as a journalist. And it was just looking at a blade of grass.
Yeah, well, the great epiphanies usually come when you realize the ordinary is not ordinary.
Yeah, that's right. No, you find the wonder in the ordinary.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So we're going to take a little bit of a wandering conversation here, and you'll realize really quick why Michael is such an endearing storyteller. So, kind of my first significant, serious question here is: since writing Omnivore's Dilemma, that was 2006. Where do you think the American food system has gone from there? I mean, is it better? Is it worse? Or how is it different? I mean, that's been almost 20 years now.
Yeah, we're coming up on that.
So give me your assessment here as you've watched this unfold. Where are we?
Yeah, it's not a simple question or answer because in some ways things are a lot better. This movement is a sign of things being better. The explosion of farmers markets and local food. There is now, if we want to just put it under the umbrella of alternative food economy, if you're willing to include organic, it's probably $75 billion. I mean, it's not inconsiderable, and it's much bigger than it was in 2006. And we have choice as consumers. You guys are producers also, but as consumers, we have choices we never had. If you care about animal welfare, you have a choice. If you care about pastured poultry, you have a choice. If you care about organic, whatever it is. And we didn't. There was really just one food chain. So that diversification of the food chain is a positive thing.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, as you travel a lot, I travel a lot, and at that time, when you traveled, you really
you were at the
stuck.
Mercy of Cisco truck.
And now
Cargill,
your host says, "Well, we've got this local foods, and you get all these wonderful things." So that's emblematic.
So that's really positive.
Of positive.
My watchword is diversity and diversification as opposed to monoculture, right? And we had a monoculture food system at every level, including the supermarket, and now we don't, and that's a good thing. That said, I don't think we've made as much progress as I would have hoped or thought was possible in 2006. I think, and I'm speaking for myself, when we made Food Inc., which came out in 2008, there was a lot about voting with your fork and that, we could change the food system one bite at a time and that the consumer could drive all this change. We've seen what the consumer can do. It's not trivial, but it's clearly not adequate. It's necessary but not sufficient. Because when you look at the big picture, things haven't changed that much. I mean, the same players are in control. We have more consolidation and more concentration in the food industry. 4 companies are slaughtering 86% of the beef, and you go through every category. Infant formula, 2 companies. And guess what happens when one of them has a problem? You can't get infant formula. We have moved toward further down a path of concentration. It is worse than when Teddy Roosevelt went after the meat trust and the other trusts.
At that time it was 7 companies, Armour, Swift, and Hammer.
50 or 60%.
Yeah, and they were controlling 50 or 60%, right. And it was and everybody thought that was an oligarchy.
Yeah, and they passed laws to break it up, and now it's worse. And
when Obama got elected, and Michelle had her garden, which was really cool.
Yeah.
Okay. A lot of my friends in the food movement, oh wow, we're finally going to have things are going to really move now. We're going to really move the needle now, and and somebody said, well, just remember, there's 10 miles of USDA offices that haven't changed. You know. 10
Yeah,
miles
no,
of USDA.
Obama understood food. He said things during the campaign that made you think that he knew exactly where the systemic problems were, and he was a very smart guy. But he chickened out. Around 2010, I don't know, some of you may remember this, but when he came into office, there were a lot of... First, he won Iowa. Imagine that, right? A Democrat winning Iowa twice. And one of the reasons he did was that he had promised to look at this issue of concentration, which affects not just consumers, it affects producers. You know, if you don't have a choice who you're going to sell your beef to, you have to take whatever price they're offering. And the four companies have divvied up the country, so they basically have complete control in certain markets. So you become a price taker. And that's the worst place, that's the most uncomfortable place any farmer can be. But this system puts you there. And the same is true if you're selling commodity crops. You are a price taker. So Obama made this pledge that he was going to go after this situation in meatpacking, in seeds, and I forget what else. And he had this listening tour, and he sent out his Secretary of Agriculture and his Secretary of Justice to have a listening tour across America. And they went, and farmers, at great risk to themselves, because they were dependent on these relationships with these companies, stepped out, spoke publicly, explained how they were being essentially abused by these people that they were forced to sell to.
The reason that it was courageous for them to do that was because they were speaking against people who wrote their checks,
exactly,
who they were selling to. So you're talking about biting the hand that feeds you.
It was a very risky move,
and
they were encouraged to do it, and they did it, and they spoke eloquently. I remember watching some of these videos, and then the midterm election of 2010 came along, and Obama was accused about being hostile to business, and he just dropped it. And I think that's why the Democrats lost the farm vote, which essentially they have probably for a generation. I think it was really stupid. But it takes a lot of courage to go up against these companies. They have so much power. And the example we were talking about this morning was at the beginning of the pandemic. And this was a moment for me that inspired me and Eric Schlosser, who Joel met earlier, to do a sequel to Food Inc., which has just come out.
It's called Food Inc. 2.
2. I know. It's not
very original. Very original. Food Inc. 2.
Sorry, we couldn't do better. But we wanted to make sure people who liked Food Inc. would know about it and see it.
You could have called it like Double Boiler or something, you know. They didn't ask me to name it.
I know. We should have called you. We should have called you. Anyway, so there was this moment early in the pandemic, and this got my attention, probably got your attention too, when the shelves in the supermarket were bare. It looked like the Soviet Union or something. And at the same time, we're seeing this split screen on our TV sets of farmers euthanizing hogs, spilling milk out on the dirt. And there's, so what's going on? This cognitive dissonance. How could you have so much food being wasted at the same time? And that was a sign of a food system that had become so concentrated and so specialized that we had two basic food chains then that were, one was feeding institutions, schools, factories, offices, restaurants, and that completely shut down. But they were so specialized they couldn't take those giant egg trays or the big boxes of milk they were selling to corporations and move them into the supermarket food chain. So that was a sign of how brittle the system had become and how unresilient. But the thing that really got my attention was when John Tyson, the president of Tyson, one of the four big packers in every meat.
Feeding you like family.
Yeah, exactly. Feeding you like family. He took an ad out. So what had happened was the public health authorities in his communities where his plants were, particularly in Waterloo, Iowa, these plants had been going full speed ahead during the pandemic, and people were dying. Because they weren't taking any precautions, no masking, no separation, and they were just going flat out trying to produce
And these
meat.
plants are they're dark, they're moist,
cold,
and they're cold.
Yeah, they're
cool,
vectors for disease.
Yeah, cool, moist, and cold with thousands of people
Yeah,
hip
touching
to
each other.
hip
No,
to
they're
elbow,
right. Yeah,
working.
and using knives and
And
cutting
often
themselves.
being paid so poorly that they're not eating well at home either.
That's right.
Because many of them are trying to send money to their relatives.
Many are undocumented.
To their home country so they can get here. And so they're living on ramen noodles and the dregs of.
And they have no recourse. I mean, they just have to do what they're told.
Right.
And so the local sheriff went and toured the plant and said, "This is crazy. We are creating a huge public health risk for the whole community." And he tried to shut them down. Tyson takes out an ad in the paper and saying, "Dear Mr. President."
Not the local paper.
No. This is the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. Full-page ad. I remember seeing it. And he says, "We need you to invoke what's called the Defense Production Act to reopen our production lines because, there's not enough food in the supermarket." In fact, this plant was supplying China. It wasn't supplying U.S. Supermarkets, but okay, technicality. And now the Defense Production Act is a law we've had since the 50s, since the Korean War. And it's a tool for the government to get corporations in times of war or national crisis to do things they don't want to do. So let's say Ford is making cars and the government needs them to make tanks or planes or whatever. That's why we have it. It's been invoked very few times. This time, it's being invoked not to make Tyson do something it doesn't want to do, but to do exactly what they do want to do. And so 2 days later, President Trump signs the executive order that was written by Tyson and reopens the production lines despite all the public health threats. The reason I think this is significant is that the reason we have antitrust laws in this country, and have had them for 120 years or so, is because people recognized then that concentrations of power that large, so large that they can push around the government, is just dangerous for a republic. And that kind of concentration of wealth should not be permitted. And so we had, 75 years of antitrust enforcement. We would break up companies like this or not let them merge to form. But all that stopped. And this was a real sign that we had gone way too far down that road of concentration. So that's a big theme of the New Food Inc., is looking at concentration. One thing that's hopeful, though, we're talking about what's hopeful and what's not hopeful, is that whatever you think about this particular government, they have revived antitrust enforcement. It's a bipartisan issue. There's a lot of support on the right as well as the left. And we'll see how successful they are. But they put in place a team that is trying to undo the mistake Obama made and actually do something about it. And I think it's an effort we all need to support, because I think that is the heart of the problem with the food system right now.
Yeah, and one of the ways to alter it is the cumulative effect of a lot of small holdings that come. I mean, I'm always reminded that we've got, in the U.S., we've got right now, I think it's 35 million acres of lawn.
Yeah, something like that.
35 million acres of lawn.
I've written about that.
And 36 million acres housing, growing, and feeding the forage for recreational horses.
Yeah.
That's 71
really?
million
Is that
acres.
Right?
Yeah.
Wow.
71 million acres, and we haven't even gotten to the golf courses yet.
Yeah, I know.
So it's
you
not
wouldn't
that
you wouldn't want to graze those, though. The chemicals,
Yeah.
terrible.
It's not that any of that is bad, and nobody hears against the lawn, and nobody hears against a golf course.
Yeah.
But it does indicate opportunity if things are really out of sync. That creative entrepreneurial opportunity is there for people who are ready to to jump
we're
on
collecting
this.
a lot of solar energy, and it could go to food.
Yeah. So the concentration is one of the big themes, and in your opinion, in 20 years, the concentration has actually worsened and not gotten better. I mean, that's our takeaway from this.
No,
point.
It's been since 1980. There's no check on companies combining and controlling markets.
Just been a slow, just a climb, slow trajectory.
The one other negative thing I'd want to point out is we have had the percentage of the American diet that is dominated by what's called ultra-processed food has grown. It's like 70% of the American diet is now ultra-processed. And
What's ultra processed?
So ultra-processed, so we used to talk about junk food, which was not a very scientific term, but we kind of knew what it meant. Ultra-processed food is food, this is how it's defined by the man who coined this phrase, who was an epidemiologist from Brazil named Carlos Monteira. Really smart guy. He came up with it because he was trying to understand why Brazil had this explosion in obesity and diabetes. And he looked at the so-called disappearance numbers, like how much protein, fat, sugar was in the diet, and it hadn't changed. And that made no sense to him. But the form in which people were getting their nutrients had changed. Instead of home cooking and even like coffee with tons of sugar, the way Brazilians like it, they were now moving from home-cooked food to processed food. And so there was something specific about the processed food that made it worse, even if you were getting the same amount of salt, fat, sugar, and...
That's such a fascinating thing because, dietitians, the food, elite.
Yeah, they go by nutrients.
They do,
Yeah.
and they don't look at whole food. They don't look at the difference between corn on the cob and high fructose corn syrup.
Exactly.
And I can remember in high school, when I was in high school in 1974, a guy did a science experiment in our local. They had the science fair competitions. This guy did it was a rat mouse feeding study, and he took. I don't remember whether it was Cheerios or Wheaties, but it was box breakfast cereal, and he fed rats. And then he took the raw ingredients listed, and he fed those. He went and got those in raw form and fed them to the rats. The rats that were getting the raw ingredients, slick, healthy, thriving. The ones that were eating
The processed version.
supposedly the same thing out of the were dying. They looked all mangy. They were junky. And I'll never forget looking at those side by side.
Yeah.
What he showed. So
Well, it shows you. Yeah, I mean, food is not about nutrients.
what do they do to it? I mean,
That's
how
what
do you
don't
alter
understand.
it that much?
So let me just go back and define ultra-processed food if that's a challenge, because it is. And not everybody accepts this definition. But ultra-processed food is food made with ingredients that a normal person does not have at home. Like you don't have any high fructose corn syrup in your pantry. You do not have any xanthan gum.
Monosodium glutamate.
Yeah, all those things. Right? Nobody has that.
One of your favorite things, and I use it all the time when I'm out presenting, is your take that we probably shouldn't eat anything that was unavailable before 1900. Am I right?
I think I said anything your great-grandmother wouldn't recognize.
Yeah, about
as
1900
food.
is this. And of course, the fun thing is that hot dogs were introduced at the 1890 World's Fair.
Is that right?
Yeah.
In Chicago?
So 10 years.
That's a good fact.
A 10-year, under the radar. All right,
But there are probably two kinds of hot dogs. There's the ultra-processed hot dog, and there's the one that's just pureed meat.
That's got like 3 ingredients,
Right.
It's beef,
That's the
pork,
other thing. Don't eat anything with more than 5 ingredients.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's one definition. The other definition is this is food you could not make without a factory. Like you couldn't make this stuff at home. I mean, you could not make a Dorito at home. You believe me, read the ingredient list. It's like 20 ingredients. So he put forward this idea, and then there was a very skeptical scientist at the National Institute of Health named Kevin Hall, who didn't believe this idea, that he thought nutrients, like most nutrition people, it was all about the nutrients. If you had too much sugar or too much fat, you were going to have a problem. He gets people to live in a hotel for a month, so he completely controls their diet. He gives them a choice: ultra-processed food with set amount of the various nutrients, and then whole foods, again, exact same nutrients. And people could choose. So for the first 2 weeks, they'd be on the ultra-processed food, then they'd switch them over to the whole foods. They could eat as much as they wanted in each case. The people eating the ultra-processed food ate 500 more calories per person per day. So it's food that has been engineered to get you to overeat. All the sophisticated food science is about that. Now, there may be other things going on. Ultra-processed food has very little fiber. It's completely absorbed in the small intestine. leaving nothing for your microbiome. That may be a factor. I mean, we're still figuring out what is the problem with this kind of food. But anyway, this food is not only dominating our diet, but we're exporting it now to countries like Brazil. And these are countries who don't have the resources for, diabetes medicine or weight loss injections, and they're really going to struggle. They are struggling.
Right, and it's engineered to be addictive.
Oh yeah.
I mean, they know what your mitochondria want.
Yeah.
And so
which is sugar fast, right? Food that is absorbed really
because
fast. They have it down.
in normal primal diets, those things are hard to come by. You can only find honey so often.
Yeah.
Maple syrup.
In nature, you're not going to find a lot of sugar.
A lot of that stuff.
And you're going to end up eating a lot of fiber, and that's going to slow the absorption. And so it is a revolutionary change in our diet. And it really doesn't start till the 50s, but it doesn't get bad until like 80s, 90s or so. And it's just getting worse. And so that's a way in which things have gotten worse. Now, what's behind that is agricultural policy, among other things. We have a system that makes corn and soy, these commodity crops, very cheap and irresistible as raw ingredients. Now, nobody will eat corn and soy in the form that we grow it. It's not food. It's either animal feed or it's a raw ingredient for processed food. And if you look at all the things you can tease out of a kernel of number 2 commodity corn, it's the maltodextrin, it's all those ingredients that end up in
I think you have a chapter
food.
on that in Omnivore's Dilemma.
Yeah,
a whole
I
chapter on the stuff you can
and the list
you can
of
tease
things,
out. Yeah,
amazing. It's just amazing.
So when you go to the supermarket and you see all these colorful labels and boxes and packages of variety,
it looks like variety.
It's actually not very much diversity.
It's really
actually
corn
just
and soy.
a few things repackaged and reformed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, moving people off this diet is very difficult. I think we have to start in the schools. I think we have to start with feeding our kids whole food at school, if they're at school. But these food habits get established early in life, and they're hard to break. So it's kind of a dark story, but some bad things have happened since that book came out.
Yeah. Well, sometimes most of the time, culturally, for a pendulum to swing the other direction, it has to go almost to a crisis point on the one side before it finally comes back. And
my worry is though we have this pharmaceutical fix now, right? Ozempic and the related drugs, and lots of people are taking them and they're losing weight on them, and but they're not changing their diet. And you may drop the pounds, but there are a lot of side effects people don't like. You can't ever get off them because you'll put the weight back on. But if you continue to eat an ultra-processed diet, just less of it, you're still going to have the inflammation and all the diseases that come from that because it's a very inflammatory diet.
So I looked up ultra-processed foods to avoid under your
What'd you find?
regimen, and here's a list: ice cream.
No. I mean,
well,
some ice cream,
not
that have
some ice
gums
cream.
in it and all sorts of crap in it. Yeah, look at the labels. But ice cream is a very simple one ingredient food.
if it's made properly
Yeah.
and not ultra processed.
And that's the problem. It's very hard to tell the difference between a simple corn chip that's 2 ingredients, right, oil and corn, and a Dorito, which is 21 ingredients and is going to be irresistible. So you have to read the labels.
Right. So yeah.
What else?
So the good ice cream and the bad ice cream are both cold. They're
Yes.
both wet.
Both delicious.
Both delicious. And so a mass-produced bread.
Yeah.
Mass-produced bread for sure.
Now, there is a great example of a food that, right, I mean, those of you who bake know how few ingredients it takes to make this wonderful miracle of a loaf of bread, right?
Yeah.
Some starter and some salt and some water and some flour, and you've got it. But look at even like Dave's Killer Bread or something like that. Look how many ingredients are on it. they've been, I looked at this when I was writing Cooked, where I learned about sourdough baking. And
I think it was October 2020, the #1 Googled food in the food category on Google.
sourdough bread.
Sourdough bread starter.
People were baking like crazy, yeah. And everybody was posting their loaves. They were very proud of their loaves. I have to admit I did it also. But all over Instagram and Twitter, usually men posting their like heroic loaves. I noticed women weren't doing it quite so much. Yeah, but bread has been so corrupted, in fact, that the FDA had to change its official definition of bread. This began in the 50s. They have something called a standard of identity for certain foods. Like if you're going to call it bread, it has to have flour and this and that. But it used to say it could only have these ingredients. And then suddenly there were all these new ingredients, texturizers, preservatives, and things to also leaven the bread in like an hour. I went to a Wonder Bread factory when I was doing that. And you know how long it takes to leaven a loaf of bread, right? You need a few hours. Now, they can do it in 30 minutes with the chemicals they put in that bread. Yeah, it's like, just pops up. It's a different process.
And when you get it, you can squeeze it into a ball, a whole loaf. You can squeeze it in a ball that'll go in this glass. I mean, there's no substance to it.
It'll stay soft for a long time. For a while, I was taking.
And it won't mold.
No, mold doesn't like to eat it. That's another food rule. If it won't eventually rot, it's not food. Yeah. I used to have a Twinkie that I brought with me on speaking things like this, and I would say, this Twinkie's 2 years old, and it's still soft. And eventually everyone would come up after and want to give it a squeeze, so it turned into a pancake. But I was amazed at the performance of that substance.
Yeah. I ran into a lady that had an 18-year-old McDonald's burger on her shelf just to see how long it would, and it hadn't molded, it didn't change, it didn't do anything.
It's a good test.
Yeah, it's a good test. So carbonated drinks. Yeah,
that's an ultra-processed food. Just because most people don't have what they need to make it at home. It's a sugar delivery system. Now, sugar is a simple food, you could argue, but we tend not to eat it by itself.
Right. Fruit-flavored yogurts.
So this was an interesting discovery. Fruit-flavored yogurts. I went around the supermarket looking, and I found there were, I think it was Danone and a couple other companies, had yogurts that ounce for ounce had as much sugar as Coca-Cola. Now, we think of yogurt as this healthy food, right? But it's another sugar delivery system if you get it, with the pre-sweetened. I mentioned this to Gary Hirschberg, who started Stonyfield, and he said, "Oh yeah, I don't buy those. I sweeten yogurt myself. I put a little maple syrup in." You have to take control because they're going to put too much sugar in everything. Because it is well known that if you put sugar in any product, you will sell more of it. It's really simple, and it's irresistible. I mean, we are hardwired to like sugar, so we have to take control of our diet back. We just cannot let corporations cook for us.
Great. Okay, I think we've dealt with the ultra. Everybody okay with the ultra processed conversation? I think so I want to turn a little corner in the conversation.
By the way, we're going to take questions later. So
we are. I'm going to try to leave 15 minutes or so for questions at the end. Fascinating stuff. So I want to turn a little corner. Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, and BlackRock and others are buying thousands of acres of U.S. farmland. I thought farming was not a way to get rich. And yet the richest are buying farmland. What's the story?
Yeah, what's the deal? So Bill Gates is now the largest landowner in America. He has 226,000 acres.
Last I saw was like 256.
Wow.
I mean, I think he's still
amazing.
He still has that division going.
Yeah.
They're still making.
I don't know exactly. I mean, I think some of it is just diversification. When you have that much money, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, and they understand how volatile the stock market is. So any good financial advisor is probably telling them, got to buy some art, got to buy some land, got to buy some stocks, some bonds, and to have I think it's also a recognition that the future is going to have some real serious food security problems. And being able to grow food, owning farmland is going to be precious. We're in for a period of great uncertainty in terms of the food system. I mean, it has these internal problems from concentration that we know it can't withstand crises. We saw that at the beginning of the pandemic. We have climate change, here. That is going to totally mix up where you can grow corn. It's going to move. I mean, all these, belts of crops are going to be moving north. A lot of them are going to move north. So food security is going to be a big issue in the future, and the people who own farmland are going to have a powerful edge. My guess is they're hearing about that, and that's one of the reasons.
They're just getting themselves positioned to be able to have. So
it's going to be a very valuable asset.
Yeah. So that's the reason. The reason I love spending any time or reading what Michael writes or picking his mind is because he's out here rubbing shoulders with people I don't rub shoulders with, and
Bill Gates does not take my calls.
Yeah, he doesn't take your calls.
You got the wrong idea.
Shucks,
But anyway.
Shucks. But when you look at trajectories, that's what I'm talking about. Trajectories, you have to put a lot of little stories together, and that's how you actually have a credible trajectory.
Right.
You can't make a trajectory out of one news source, one story,
right.
one thing. So you got to have, and
Totally agree.
So you're eclectic in this approach, which brings me to this next question, which is, about 12 years ago, Impossible Burger launched,
Yeah.
Beyond Beef launched, to great hoopla with literally hundreds of millions, if not $1 billion, of venture capital.
Huge. A lot of Silicon Valley money, yeah.
Yeah. Dumped in, and then that quickly morphed into the whole cell-cultured, fake meat, all this stuff. And recently,
cell-cultured meat is not fake. I mean, there are problems with it, but
Yeah.
it's actual meat. I had a chicken breast from a chicken that didn't die, that just had a biopsy taken, basically.
Right.
And I can tell you about that. But yeah, the fake meats are beyond.
Tell us about it.
So
I've still got another direction I'm going.
Okay,
but
okay.
Tell us about that.
So has anyone else had
any
cell-cultured meat yet?
Cell-cultured meat?
I don't. What?
They just passed a statute making it.
Yes.
Yeah.
All these kind of meats, yeah. They made it illegal in Florida to protect the beef industry. I don't know who is behind this, but I would call the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, and they might have some hand in that piece of legislation. So the idea here is to take cells from any animal and multiply them, feeding them amino acids and sugars and whatever they need, and creating
Feedstocks from corn and soybeans.
Exactly. Exactly right. That's one of the real vulnerabilities of the system. And the idea is to grow meat without animals. And it can be done. They have figured out how to do it. A chicken breast this big costs $500. But, scale. They think they'll scale it up. I actually don't think they will be able to scale it up because
That's where I wanted to go with.
Yeah.
I'm really curious because I just read, somebody sent me a 10-year-old futuristic essay from a congressional hearing about the future of cell-cultured food, okay? And so you had these...
Optimistic?
Yes, it was so optimistic. It said that by 2022, which was 2 years ago,
Yeah.
farmland prices would drop by 30% because we didn't need it anymore. There would be an excess of farmland. So I'm dovetailing this with whole Bill Gates.
Yeah.
I find this... These guys,
And Bill Gates is invested in this
he's
stuff.
invested in this hugely, and their narrative has been farmland's going to collapse in value because we
Right.
don't need it anymore, and the beef market, they said by 2022. So this is a 10-year-old, prediction from the industry that by 2022, beef prices will collapse because 30%.
new alternative.
Yeah. They said we will overtake 30% of the beef market, so the beef prices are going to collapse. Anybody seen the price of cattle lately? We've got an unbelievable shortage. My point is, or my question then is, what are the problems, or what's the deal? How do you reconcile these rich people investing in farmland, but then the folks that are invested in sending out press releases saying we don't need farmland anymore?
Yeah, I know. It's a
disconnect.
disconnect. I don't think the same people are making that judgment. Look, the predictions were completely overhyped for. We should separate out synthetic or fake meat from cultured meat, because cultured meat is real meat. And if you taste it, you know. Whereas if you eat a Beyond Burger, you know it's not exactly beef. And it's a pretty good imitation, but it's a marvel of food science. So I met the guy, Patrick Brown, who started this whole movement. He was a professor at Stanford, really worried about climate change, recognized that beef production was one of the big contributors to climate change, and set out, as he told me then, to destroy the meat industry. This was very much a professor's kind of dream, a little not rooted in the realities of agriculture or food, and he was a vegan himself, so I didn't know how he was going to make it taste right. But anyway.
You think he ate Doritos?
Not this guy. He was a purist. Anyway, they figured it out, right? They figured out a kind of synthetic idea of a hamburger and sausage and chicken nuggets, I think they just introduced. And as food science, it's kind of impressive that they could do this. On the other hand, and it's food science in a good cause, you could argue, unlike most food science, which is just about making us overeat, or making food that never goes bad or never rots. They had a noble cause behind what they were doing. So why didn't it work? Why isn't it working? They're not getting the uptake they thought. I think there are a couple reasons. One is it's not cheaper than meat. It's still more expensive. And if you're going to get people to buy a meat substitute, supposedly because in a fast food hamburger you can barely tell what's in there. That was a kind of a low bar to hit, right? A McDonald's hamburger. But it's not cheaper, and until it's cheaper, I don't think they will get. I don't see people making the calculation that why should I spend more for not getting the real thing? That's for the consumer. That seems kind of weird. The other thing is, though, it is an ultra-processed food. Look at the ingredients on Impossible Burger. It's like 21 ingredients, one of which has never been in the human diet. They used genetic modification technology to simulate a protein found in blood called heme iron. And this heme iron, they get it from a soybean root instead of from
the bean.
Yeah. But they have to genetically produce it. Yeast produce it for it. Anyway, do you want to eat something?
They're not digging up the soybean roots.
No, they don't.
They're taking that whatever genetic material.
It's made in a vat.
Okay.
Genetically engineered, and yeasts make it, but they found it in a plant, so they weren't starting with meat. But it's an ultra-processed food. You're eating something that's got 21 ingredients or whatever it is. This one that's never been in the human diet, never gone through, safety testing. So that's, versus a one-ingredient food like beef. So I think that has also gotten in the way. A better veggie burger in the world might be a good contribution. It's not going to ever hurt the meat system. And as I say, I think it was a very well-intentioned effort, but it doesn't look like it's going to work. And on the cell-cultured meat, the problem there is, and that if it didn't cost a lot, that has, I think, potential. I ate one of these chicken breasts. There's a company in Northern California called Upside, and they are going to probably be the first to commercialize cell-cultured meat. And they served me a chicken breast. And it was a chicken breast. It wasn't a particularly good chicken breast, but it was a chicken breast. And it was like, wow, Could have fooled me. The problem is the feed you need to grow these cells has to be pharmaceutical grade. If it has any contaminants in it, it'll ruin the entire batch. It's grown. It looks like a brewery with these giant stainless steel tanks. And in that, there's a slurry of chicken cells or duck cells or beef cells. But you get one bacteria in there, and it multiplies faster than the cells do.
I've read, maybe you could confirm this. It'd be good to get a confirmation on this. I read that they use a lot of antibiotics in this because it's so hard. It's hard to duplicate, kidneys and liver, and we have a wonderful, vein, artery, filtration, circulation system. These don't have a good circulatory system.
They don't have an immune system.
Yeah, they don't have an immune system,
Yeah.
and so they're using a lot of.
I'll have to inquire about that.
antibiotics.
I don't know. I would not be surprised.
Yeah.
My takeaway was we were deceived by this company. Actually, they gave us a tour and we saw all the stainless steel tanks, and they claimed there's chicken in this one and beef in this one, and then they served me a chicken breast, and we learned later that the chicken breast hadn't come out of that process. That there was another process, that just produced a slurry that you could use to make ground meat or chicken nuggets. But to actually get cuts of meat was another process that required PhDs to rotate these things every 2 hours. So that's never going to scale. So I think there's a lot of hype, and I think it's, in the software industry, they call it vaporware, when you announce some brilliant new software, but in fact, you haven't invented it yet. I think that's where we are with cell-cultured meat.
That's fascinating. I think, I think you're everything that I've read. I think you're dead on that. I think that the idea that that's going to take and back to your antitrust thing. Goodness, if there's one way to control food, I think we're on the same page that in the spring of 2020. If there had been, instead of feeding the U.S., instead of having 300 mega centralized processing facilities feeding the U.S., canneries probably all the way through, instead of that, if there had been 300,000 community-based, maybe 50 employee, canneries, abattoirs, whatever, processors,
No, the shock
would we
would
have
have-
had as big a shock? Of course not.
No,
Of
I
course
mean,
not.
Resilience comes from diversity. We know this.
Yeah.
If you have a lot of different people feeding you, you're not going to go hungry. But we depend on so few companies that it puts us in a very vulnerable place. Yeah. And so I think diversifying the food system, having people at every scale, and certainly having local people is the best insurance policy against ever going hungry.
Yeah. So from as a food sociologist, looking at this, talk about concentration. If your food now comes from a laboratory, as opposed to as long as the sun shines, the rain goes, and the grass grows, you can have a cow, you
Right.
can have a chicken, you can. That's the ultimate democratized access. If access has to go through a multi-million-dollar facility owned by a multi-billion-dollar investor, that's the ultimate way to control. To control,
and it's brittle. It's just a brittle system, and that's what we have to be concerned of, because the only thing we can be sure of in the future is there will be more shocks, and we have to get ready for it. And the way we get ready is to diversify and democratize the food system. The problem is, and you guys all, I'm sure, have feelings about regulation. The problem is that they're not making it easy to do a lot of things that need to be done. And the reason is, and this goes back to the antitrust point too, the biggest players in any market love regulation. And they want it to
They say they don't, though.
Oh, they always
They say they don't.
Yeah. But they know regulation keeps competitors out. They know that if you're a big company, it's much easier to fill out all the forms and do everything you have to do. You have a whole department does it. I mean, I've been acquainted with this recently because my mother, who's 95, now needs help. And she wants to live at home. She lives in New York. And so we hired a couple people to take care of her. Now, one of my brothers-in-law is a lawyer, unfortunately, and he insisted we do this by the books. And so we are. And so I have the 4 insurance policies I need. But I just got a notice. I screwed something up. I owe the New York State Department of Workers' Compensation $10,000 fine. Because I couldn't, because these rules were designed for a company that has somebody who fills out forms. Yes. So that's my
You don't have an in-house HR department.
No, I do not. I am it, and I'm it up. So I haven't told my mother, but I'm appealing. So the point is, we have regulations.
I think you need to write a story about that.
Yeah, I should, except I'm exposed. I have to be careful. I think we have to understand that a lot of regulations are designed at scale. And the problem is they need to be scale sensitive, but it's very easy to make the scale neutral argument, and they do all the time. So anyway, that piece of it is a struggle, but it's a fight worth fighting.
Yeah. I got one more question, and we're going to open it up. So anybody's got a question, we're going to open it up here after this. This is my final crack. And I haven't asked all my questions, by the way, because I knew that
I talk too much.
No, because it's just always fascinating and it's never enough time. So I want to touch this whole. We got a farm bill coming up now, and mandatory national animal identification, radio frequency identification collars.
They're still talking about this?
Is in it. And if it doesn't get killed, it will be in the farm bill. And so I want to loop that with this whole H5N1 stuff that's going on in the Texas dairy, and now it's in 9 states. They sold the cows, and then 2 workers have now gotten it. They haven't died, but they've got.
One of them had respiratory symptoms.
Yes,
which is concerning.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then of course the worst thing that happened was 24 cats at the dairy drank the milk and died.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so Americans and their cats, that's.
I know. Don't mess with that.
Yeah. And so in the kind of the stuff that our movement reads, and watches up on, there's, and of course, I don't trust the internet on either side.
Right,
okay,
right.
I mean it's all, but there is discussion that, because I can tell you the onslaught has already started to take that mandatory NAIS. Yeah, 10 years ago we defeated it. We thought it was dead.
Yeah, I thought it was
dead. Here it comes. And there's a lot of scuttlebutt, and I was hoping maybe you could shed some light on it. On this almost feels like an effort to create a necessity for the NI, almost like it's a manufactured.
But would it apply to chickens too?
Yes, although it's cows, number one, but yes, it would apply to all livestock eventually. I mean, this is all part of the Internet of Things. There are 4 bills in Congress now to, by eminent domain, require a farmer to allow 5G towers to basically put every square inch of agricultural land into the Internet of Things, the data. And of course, it's all being touted, so if you have a sick cow, you can take a picture of it, infrared, put it on the internet, and artificial intelligence will tell you what to do with the cow. I guarantee if you have a sick chicken in a Tyson chicken house, it's never going to say, maybe you should give the chicken fresh air, sunshine, and green grass and exercise, and it'll get better. It's never going to say that. So my question is where do you see? There just seems to be an increasing epizootics, animal diseases, different things coming on, and where does the government's oversight and the farmer-owned animals and property rights overlap? Because if I have one sick chicken, they come and exterminate the whole. I mean, and I have no legal recourse. They just. Yeah. Whereas normally when we're culling animals and we're selecting, a lot of these, even if in a Tyson chicken house, they don't all die.
Right.
Why don't they take the good ones and breed those And so we increase, genetic strength.
Yeah, I think in principle, that's how you're going to beat a disease like this. However, while you're waiting to see who emerges as the resistant chicken, you've got a lot of problems. So I don't know how you navigate that exactly. Where I live in Connecticut, there's, and most of New England, the ash trees are all dying.
Yeah.
I mean, I have tons of them on my property. And every year I have to have someone come and take down another big, beautiful tree.
Yeah.
I have one ash that is resistant. It looks fantastic. It's been right next to all these other ashes. There's some genetics here that may be really valuable, and I wouldn't have known it if this disease hadn't come
That is
along.
fascinating because I've met farmers, because it's the same in Virginia too. We're having the same issue. I've heard that Kentucky Slugger has football-sized stadium warehouses full of ash for baseball bats.
It's the only wood
years.
used for baseball
All right,
bats
and
hammer
Yeah,
handles.
but I've run into farmers who went in and cut every living ash tree because if this gets in it, then it's not good for lumber.
Yeah,
And
that's
so the
right.
price
You
goes
can't use
down.
it. Yeah.
So being proactive, they've gone in and harvested
So that's
every
like
ash tree on the-
slaughtering healthy chickens.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it's a similar
Yeah.
it's a similar thing, and we're losing them all. But I'm watching an ash tree by one of our lanes. It's young, but it's healthy and growing
Yeah.
really, really well. And I'm
Keep an
just
eye on
as
that.
I go by it, I wonder, are you going to be the
You're the
one?
one,
Are you
yeah.
going to be the one? So this extermination, this scorched earth, you have one and we kill them all, is just.
It's not how you're going to find.
Issue.
It's not how you're going to find resistance. But I don't know enough. It would really be irresponsible of me to say I know how to deal with this problem. But in general, I think looking for resistant individuals. This is how it works in nature, right? That's why pesticides fail eventually, because you find some resistant insect. And I'm sure there are resistant chickens out there, and we need to find them. I just don't know exactly how we do it.
Yeah, and the current. Yeah, in the current policy, not only does it keep you from finding them, but then when they keep trying to do the vaccines and the pharmaceutical approach, it makes superbugs.
Yeah,
So then you have that on the other end.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Who's got a question?
Who has a question? Yes, ma'am.
I'm from Wisconsin. We have a 7-generation dairy farm.
There's a microphone coming to you.
There we go.
Did you say 7 generations?
We have a
Wow.
7-generation Wisconsin dairy farm. We feel like our industry is under attack. And so I'm just curious. I'm here because they're making hay, so the men couldn't come. So I'm just curious, what do you foresee our future? Do you see it going further? I'm the 5th. I have a son who's 30 years old, will be taking it over from us, and then he's got 2 daughters that have every indication wanting to take it on as well too. We're trying to keep it modern, and we are not organic. But we want to get away from the machine as too.
Yeah.
My son is doing all kinds of incredible things with cover crops and carbon sequestration as well.
That's so great.
But it's struggle.
So, dairy, there's a segment on dairy in Food Inc. too. And we interviewed a farmer in, I think it might have been in Wisconsin. And she was describing the pressure to get bigger. The milk truck doesn't want to come up a dirt road they want a huge amount of milk. And so you're forced into this exceeding what your land can carry, so you then have to move them indoors, and then you have to feed them grain, and it takes you down this path, and you're not going to be able to compete with these mega dairies that are popping up in the desert. I mean, one of the strangest facts in American agriculture right now is that we've taken dairy from states like Wisconsin and Vermont, and we've moved it to New Mexico and Southern California, to deserts.
The reason is so the cows don't have any mud.
Yeah,
Because
that's
no, I'm
right.
serious.
It's true.
Everything evaporates. I mean, farms in temperate areas deal a lot with mud because the cows have to walk to the parlor, and I mean, and so you go to the desert, and all those mud problems and all the urine vaporizes,
Yep.
and It's a simplification.
And also, the animals spend less energy keeping themselves warm, and so you get more milk. Also, there's tons of alfalfa being grown in the desert. Another really stupid idea.
Yeah.
No, I mean, water is precious in California and New Mexico, and you're using it to grow alfalfa. Yeah, that's right. And you know, we're shipping alfalfa to Saudi Arabia for their polo horses. Okay, there's so much absurdity in this system. I mean, I think that the dairy farmers who have had the best luck have branded their product and stepped out of that system, because that system is just going to drive you to consolidation and numbers that you might not have enough land to support. It's certainly not going to encourage you to graze animals. And that, you know, there are a lot of branded dairy products now that they're not necessarily organic. In Northwest Connecticut, where I am, we've got a couple brands that have popped up, and people support them because they want to support local. And the fact that you're doing all this great work around climate is a selling point. So I think, you know, it's the challenge that Joel is an expert in, which is it's very hard to be a great farmer and a great marketer, right? And a great writer. I mean, he's put a lot of things together, but that's hard for a lot of people because I know how much time it takes to run a dairy farm. But stepping into that side of branding and marketing has, and it doesn't have to be raw milk either. I mean, just it can be pasteurized milk. Seems to be a path. I mean, I don't know enough to recommend anything to you, but I just see that path emerging. And it's driven by the interest in local food.
Yeah, and so what happens is, again, we're talking about the swinging pendulum, and it's gone so far. I mean, I'm sure that in 1908, when Teddy Roosevelt started the Food Safety Inspection Service,
yeah,
he could not have imagined that in 2024, it wouldn't be 7 controlling 50, it would be 4 controlling 80%.
Yeah.
I mean, he couldn't have imagined that, and most people couldn't have imagined the kind of consolidation that we've had now. And so that pendulum, the awareness, your writing has literally, you know, created awareness. I remember when Food Inc. came out, goodness, for the next month, our sales building was full of people. I never thought about this before. And so it's just
people are looking for alternatives. Yeah. There is a new consumer out there, and they're willing to pay a premium for a better product, and they understand the difference. And that's part of the job of the storytellers, to make sure they do know that.
And you may have to collaborate with 2 or 3 other
dairy
farmers to get enough volume to brand something, you know, and work together. And farmers are the worst collaborators in the world because we're all a bunch of hermit curmudgeons who hate people. And that's why we're out we have a better relationship with our tractor than our spouse, you know. The tractor never rolls its eyes at us, you know. The cows are always happy to see us. All right, with that, let's go to another question. Yes, ma'am, way over there. Okay. Just
here comes the microphone.
Here comes the mic.
Hi, I'm a public school teacher. My experience this last year teaching 10-year-olds is that the typical snack being brought is a large bag of Doritos or Takis. I even had a very intelligent young boy at the door hold this large container of Peeps and ask, "Is this a nutritious snack?" I heard you say, Michael, that we need to start in the schools. I'm willing to teach about it and write about it, but what do we do?
Great question. Great question.
Right up your alley.
Yeah. No, I think getting schools involved in the movement is really important. They have a couple roles to play. I mean, one is bringing back cooking of lunch in the school because a lot of the food service now in school is ultra-processed food. And some schools no longer have kitchens. They just have microwaves. But I think that as a place for parents to organize and drive change, serving real food in school has so many benefits. The kids learn better. I mean, if you feed them that sugary, quickly absorbed meal, they're going to be bouncing off the walls for, the period after lunch. And Alice Waters, the chef in Berkeley, started something called the Edible Schoolyard. And it is now, there are thousands of them around the country. You might look into it. It involves gardening, putting gardens in schools and teaching kids how to grow things, and then teaching them how to cook with them. And it's usually been joined to an effort to improve the school food. Schools, if schools really got behind local food, think what they could do for the local food economy. We could have something called school-supported agriculture, like community-supported agriculture. And there's a movement to do this in California, starting in the universities. Alice Waters has been lobbying the head of the UC system, which buys an immense amount of food, to commit to a certain percentage local and sustainable. And this could be a game changer. But, you know, the other thing that happens at the Edible Schoolyard is they teach kids about how food makes them feel. And if you give a kid a Twinkie, check in with them 20 minutes later and ask them how they feel. And then check in with them an hour later after they've crashed. And give them a kind of learning experience so they begin to associate what they feel in their bodies with what they've ingested, because they're totally out of touch. And they actually do this with some junk food at the Edible Schoolyard. And the kids realize when they crash later, oh yeah, I don't like how this feels. So experiential education is really important. But it's a big effort to organize parents to insist, the way you insist on a quality education, insist on quality school lunch. I think getting school lunch right, it has so much potential for driving change, not to mention healing young bodies.
Yeah, I remember when the Iraq War was going on with Junior Bush, and I did a calculation that that one day worth of military budget for that war in Iraq would, I think it was double, not triple, but it was at least double every single school lunch, allowable amount, like the allowable amount.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's like
for a year.
$1.13.
For a year,
I know.
one day.
I know.
It would double it for a year. I mean, so the longer I live, the more I realize you could disagree, but there's not a problem in the world that's lacking for money.
Yeah.
It's where it's placed.
Priorities.
Yeah, it's where it's placed. Okay, another question. Yes, ma'am, right here. Wait a minute, microphone's coming.
What are your thoughts on foods that are grown in like water towers where you have to add the nutrients into the water to grow the
Hydroponics
food?
or aeroponics?
Yeah. Well, I think, last year or 2 years ago, the Organic Standards Board or bureaucracy ruled that you could have hydroponic organic. I think it's a complete contradiction in terms. I mean, organic is about soil.
Yep.
That's how it started. It was about soil health leading to human health. And the idea that we could simulate that in water seems to me, I mean, I haven't seen nutritional comparisons, but I'm guessing food grown in real soil is going to be much more nutrient dense than no matter what solution you're growing it in. And, most Driscoll berries are now grown in water, and they drove this change. There's another example of a powerful concentrated company, this time in the organic sector, forcing the government to essentially dilute, in every sense of the word, the organic standards. But to me, it's about soil, and anything that violates that principle should not be called organic. It's fine if they want to grow it and have a market for, hydroponic strawberries, and it's impressive they can do it, but it just doesn't deserve to be called organic.
Yeah, we're the only country in the world that certifies.
Is that right?
We're the only country in the world that certifies
It was pure
hydroponic.
muscle. It goes to this point
yeah.
of you let companies get that powerful, and they'll have their way with the government.
Absolutely, yeah. Own the regulators. Okay, I don't know. Yes, sir. Right over here. Stand up, and the mic will come right to you.
So given that people are looking for more alternatives, and a lot of people here want to provide some of those alternatives, so there's things like cost sharing and those kinds of things, do you see the gaze of mega agribusiness and government turning on providers that are are here to put regulations in that stymie that.
I think we're seeing that. Yes. You know, I don't know how threatened they feel, but anytime there's a proposal to change a regulation to make it sensitive to scale, for example, exempt it. We had this with the Food Safety Modernization Act, and John Tester fought very hard to make some of the provisions, I don't remember the details, not apply.
I think it was $500,000. $500,000 annual sales or below. You didn't have to.
Right.
You were exempt from that.
He fought for that. I fought for that. And that if we could establish this principle that regulations change at certain scales, it would protect everybody doing what you're doing. And by the way, John Tester is really a friend of this movement, and he's up for re-election. And one of the changes we didn't talk about is that the food movement, so-called, which has many different dimensions to it, this being one of them, has some powerful friends in the U.S. Senate that they didn't have before. Two of them are Cory Booker, black urban legislator, who's on the Ag Committee, which is astonishing that he realized he could help his constituents most by working on the Farm Bill, which he's doing, and he's pushing it in a progressive direction. And John Tester, who's an ally of his, who's fighting concentration and is up for re-election. So I think it's a principle we have to fight for, that all regulations need to be scale sensitive.
But that is one thing that the big players really don't want.
No, and their argument is hard to refute.
Level playing field, all this stuff.
Who's against the level playing field?
Yeah, but it's like saying, okay, you can play football, but you can only play football in an NFL stadium. You can't have a pickup game in the backyard and have the goalpost being the lilac bush and the grape arbor. No, it's got to be played in a.
But they would say also you can still have a food safety outbreak on a small farm, which is true, but it's not going to impact as many people. So it's just a really important front in this fight.
Yeah, it sure is. Yeah, we don't. When you buy a hamburger from us, it's got meat from one animal.
Yeah.
When you buy a hamburger at McDonald's, it's got pieces of 600 animals.
Yeah.
I think that was in Food Inc., wasn't it?
Yeah, that was in Food Inc. and in Eric Schlosser's book. I don't think it's quite 600, but it's like 287 animals on average.
It's a bunch.
So, yes, the risk, the food safety risk is much greater in this industrial produced food. Right. But the focus often ends up, and the media focuses on often the little guy or gal who's producing something.
Right.
And, things go wrong. I mean, you're going to have food safety problems at any scale, but scale matters.
Yeah, it sure does. How about we go over here? Here's a gentleman right here. Stand up. The mic's coming. Protect and serve.
Hi, I just wanted to thank you guys for having this conversation today. It's like
thank you.
Bringing awareness to this.
Thank you very much.
It's like, that's like a huge part of this. And my wife and I, we have a booth here, but this is like our passion is sharing this stuff that you guys are. I could sit here and talk to you all weekend about this stuff, but I wanted to ask, going back to ultra-processed foods, I like to just share this with people. You said you have the ultra-processed food that are made with the same ingredients, but they have all this other stuff added to it. And then you have those same ingredients that's nothing's touched in it. But we still lack nutrition in our food. And how important it is that we get back to, I love everything I've learned about regenerative agriculture, working on the soil. The soil health, the planet health, human health, they're all tied together. And I'd like to know your thoughts on, we go into a grocery store and we can look at all the produce that's in there. I'm told with all the research and studying that I do on this, that if you took, I'll just use a carrot, for example. You buy a 1 pound bag of carrots. Unprocessed in 1970, you need like 5 bags to equal that. So
it's true.
That's
it's true.
And what does it all come back to?
Soil.
Right.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Did you know that the FDA used to do region by region nutrient analysis of different foods, like carrots? And they
back when it only went so far, it didn't go very far.
Right.
And so
right.
they could actually break it into regions and test it.
And so they would compare a carrot grown in Michigan to a carrot grown in Florida. Turned out, Florida soil, very sandy, low nutrients. Michigan carrots, lots of nutrients. Well, the Florida farmers were really pissed off. And guess what? They stopped asking that question. They do not do that testing anymore. If we tested all foods for nutrient density, I am quite sure we would find that the quality of the soil is the biggest factor. I mean, genetics play some role, without question. But we know healthy soil produces healthy food and nutrient-dense food. And we don't pay enough attention to it. But it is true that you have to, our soils are so diminished because of chemical agriculture that you're not getting what you used to get from a carrot. And you do have to eat more to get the exact same amount of nutrients, which is an amazing thing. And guess what? We're getting heavy. I mean, one theory of obesity is that people are overeating to get the nutrients they need, the micronutrients, the minerals.
The phytonutrients.
Phytonutrients. And until, your body knows when it's not getting something, and it will keep eating till it gets it. And so there's a chemist at Berkeley who believes this is what's driving obesity, is the lack of nutrient density in the food we're eating. So we eat more till we get the nutrients. I mean, your animals do that.
Which is pay more, eat less.
Yeah.
we're back to
that.
Are you up on the Bionutrient Food Association?
No.
So in August, this is a shameless plug, the Stockman Grass Farmer Conference we're hosting at our farm. We're going to have Dan Kittredge, the founder of the Bionutrient Food Association, and they're making a spectrometer, a wand, the size of a cell phone, where you can wand food and it will give you a nutritional reading based on the energy field. And they've tested carrots, and they found that the worst carrot, you have to eat 150 of the worst carrots to get the nutrition of the best carrot that they found. Can you imagine?
I can imagine you turn orange when you do that.
Right,
too.
right. Yeah. But it wouldn't be a nutritional orange. It'll,
no, it'd be a scary.
And then you got broccoli, and so the first one that they're doing for the full spectrum is beef, and you'd love that the one single thing they found. The University of Utah is doing the science on it, the data, and the single thing they found that is consistently makes them beef more nutritious, more phytochemicals, more conjugated linoleic acid. This omega-3, omega-6 balance, all these things. The single thing that's the most easy to go across the spectrum is how many different plants did the cow eat?
Yeah.
How many different plants did the cow eat?
It stands to reason,
which makes that irrigated alfalfa circles with depleting aquifer water going into desert dairies. I mean, how many parts of that equation are wrong?
Yeah.
So
I love that.
It's unbelievable. One more, and we're going to be done. Yes, ma'am. Way back there. We're going to send the microphone. You jumped up and stood up, so I'm going to reward your aggression here.
Enthusiasm.
Enthusiasm. Yes. I will be heard. Yes.
So talking about diversity, do you think diversity in the microbiome has anything to do with this root health? Throwing antibiotics at something versus healing the gut. I've even heard of a farmer feeding, a type of like Wind River microbes or microbes to their chickens, and they had them, a higher survival rate than they used to. I don't know if there's anything to that.
So we do know that the more diverse the microbiome, the more different species, the healthier you will be. And one of the things that's happened in the American diet is that the microbiome is less diverse than it used to be. How do you diversify our microbiome? Same way as with those cattle. Different plants. All plants have fiber, and the microbiome, that's its favorite diet. But the fiber from one plant is not the same as the fiber from another. There are many different kinds. And the microbiome needs a diversity of different kinds of plants. So feeding it all one thing, even if it's high in fiber, is not going to give you what a diverse diet would give you. So all these principles we're talking about, like diversity, they operate at every level of the scale. And if we get it right, if our soil is diverse and our microbiome is diverse, we're going to be healthier. And we need to pay much more attention to this issue. And but it is plants, that really feeds the microbiome. We've talked a lot about animals, but I want to just say a word for plants and their miracle qualities.
Right, and color
too.
and all that.
Every color
Freshness,
is another
all that, grown in
antioxidant.
compost, all that. Folks, we're out of time. Thank you for coming. Michael Pollan, a national treasure. A national treasure.
Joel.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks for your great questions, too.